Perfect. Well, thank you, Vishal. And again, always a pleasure to do a presentation for the Optimist team. Again, we've got a close partnership with that team. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time down in the Caribbean in February, which was always great. A, to kind of build out that partnership, and B, to get out of the weather over here in Portland, Oregon. So again, excited to do this presentation today. This is actually going to be a little bit of a preview of a presentation that I'm doing at NavUG Summit. Which actually came out of a lot of inspiration from some of our conversations with the folks at Optimist. So this will be kind of a rough preview in terms of kind of functionality around really what are the key things if you want to have a dashboarding or data visualization practice in your organization. There's some critical stuff that at JET we've really evaluated as being very important. So Matthew and I are going to run through some examples and we'll talk about both why is a data visualization practice going to be important, and what are some pitfalls that you may run into as you're trying to get that practice set up, and hopefully we can walk you around some ways to avoid those challenges. So a little bit about JET. JET Global Data Technologies, we've been in the dynamic space for over 17 plus years. Really what we help users do is we help users get information out of their database into a place that they can actually work with it. For a lot of clients, that's going to be Excel. I'll even show a couple Excel examples today. That's typically where folks are going for more standard reporting if they want kind of a grid view based look into their business. If they're looking for stuff like financial statements, that's a good way to do that inside of Excel. JET really is going to help you do that. But what we'll focus on today is also really that dashboarding piece. So having KPIs, having graphs, having the ability to slice and dice data very effectively is really what we specialize in. We've got over 14,000 plus companies using JET on a daily basis to ultimately make better decisions so they can drive better business outcomes. And we'll talk about how a successful data visualization practice supported by JET can really help you do that. And I always like to show this slide just because I think it is a testament towards the flexibility of JET's tools and approach to doing not only reporting but analytics. You'll see we've got a wide range of different customers, lots of companies in different industries, different sized companies. All of these companies are using JET on, again, a daily basis to get information out of their database into a place that they can work with it so that they can make those better decisions and drive those better business outcomes. As you can imagine, a system that is being used by a company for manufacturing is going to look a lot different than a company that's using it for hospitality versus a company that might be using it for retail. There are going to be customizations. There are going to be third-party add-ons. There's also likely going to be maybe other systems that they're trying to report against. But we've got this wide range of happy customers because of the flexibility of JET, that we're able to pull in all that information and then give it to you in a format that you can easily consume. So I'll start off here. I'm going to kind of define data visualization. Because as a term, it's fairly wide-ranging. Sometimes we'll use data visualization and analytics interchangeably. But when I'm talking about data visualization tools, I really want to be clear that these are kind of powerful front-end tools optimized for displaying data. Some examples I've got here. I've got Microsoft's Power BI, Tableau, if you get outside of the Microsoft stack, is an example. We have our own dashboard builder. And what you can see here, this is actually an example of a dashboard that was built out for the Optimist team here at JET for, I think, a number of retail establishments. And then to a lesser extent, you can even use Excel as a data visualization tool. But really, when we're looking at tools like Power BI, where most of the investment went into that tool is getting that front end, so that user interface that's going to look really nice. You'll see, for example, in this example, and I'll click over into it, I've got this whole example blown up inside of a slide. You'll see like a map that's blown up with different customers spread out throughout the world. This is kind of what the data visualization tools are really going to focus on. They're going to provide you an accessible way to see and understand trends, outliers, and patterns in your data. And we can see that example blown up a little bit here. You can see, really the key thing for a dashboarding tool is, you might have a couple different graphs. You'll have some sort of complex data visualization. This is actually one of the out-of-the-box options that we put together again for retailers and grocers to kind of track customer profitability so they could see where their most profitable customers are. And then there's going to be a number of KPIs that are worked in there. So pre-calculated values that can tell you a little bit about your business depending on what you're looking at. And we'll have Matthew actually go in and kind of show how those can be tied together. And if you look at this, you can kind of start imagining how this will, kind of help you drive a better business. You can see, if I can go through, if I'm a retailer, if I can look at kind of where our most profitable customers located, I can think about how I can, plan out future store openings so that I'm going to be at those profitable customers. And do the same thing if I'm in hospitality. If I want to go in and look at, where our most profitable customers located, how is that going to affect my marketing spend? I can use tools like Power BI to actually get into that information. And the fact is that I can also slice and dice data. And as I slice and dice some of these examples, these KPIs are going to change. So I can see, okay, how do these KPIs compare across different stores? But before we really get into it, I kind of want to talk about why data visualization is important as a whole. And I want to dispel a commonly held confusion element about data visualizations, because I've seen a specific statistic a number of times, and I want to clarify that it's actually incorrect. A lot of folks have actually seen that humans are hardwired to process images very quickly. The common statistic that folks are going to see here is that humans can process images 60,000 times faster than they can text. I did a little research into this. That isn't actually the case. The fastest I could find would be about 15 times faster than text. But there's some really interesting studies around how humans are able to process those images very quickly. This particular study actually came out of MIT. It was in 2014. And the study basically displayed images and saw how quickly people could kind of recognize what those images were. So, you can see obviously the human brain is hardwired to process that information very quickly. The original assumption before the study was done was that humans could process images at about 100 milliseconds, and the assumption with the study was that we probably could track that down to about 50 milliseconds. So they went through this study again. They had people sitting in front of computers. Images were displayed. They'd ask them what those images were. And they actually found that people can recognize images as quickly as 13 milliseconds, which means basically just very, very quickly, almost so quickly that you're almost kind of seeing it more subconsciously than consciously. And so kind of comparing that to words, showing you that we're looking at images about 15 times faster than we are in comparison to text. You can think about this in a business setting. That means that you can kind of look at a graph, get a sense of maybe sales amounts much quicker than you could looking at like grid view based breakdowns of those sales inside of Excel or inside of a standard report. And the interesting thing actually about this is that this 13 milliseconds is not necessarily the lower limit for how quickly people can process images. It was just the lower limit for how quickly the computer in the MIT study could actually display those images. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to kind of show an example I think will probably ring out to anybody. Is this here. I'm sure anybody that has a backyard and has kind of gone into the backyard to look at something, maybe in the after the winter, after the grass has grown. I'm sure a lot of you have gone in and seen a hose that is curled up and you've thought it's a snake. I will fully admit I have done this a few times. I've jumped pretty high thinking that, and that's really because of the principles here. I'm seeing something so quickly, my mind actually doesn't really process what it is, but I get a sense of what it is immediately. That's, again, because humans are really hardwired to look at images very quickly and take information from them. But in doing that, you want to make sure that you're looking at it quickly, you're getting what that initially is, but then you also want to be able to rationalize it a little bit more. You want to think about, if you think about the example here of looking at your hose thinking it's a snake, you don't want to look at your data that way. You don't want to see, initial spikes and make overall assumptions. You want to be able to actually see that information for what it is and then consume it and use it effectively as you're kind of driving your business. Another example here of kind of how quickly we can process information. Obviously, our subconscious bandwidth, so that kind of quick bandwidth where you're seeing stuff, is going to be really tended towards visual information. And then as we get into that conscious bandwidth, still visual is going to always be very important, but some of the other senses will start being a little bit more important. So again, pretty clear, you're going to be able to process images very quickly, which is going to be why data visualization is important. You're also going to be able to better retain and understand information. This is a statistic done out of New York University. People are going to remember 10% of what they hear, 20% of what they read, 30% of what they see, but then 80% of what they see and do. And I think this is very important if you're using a dashboarding tool, because you're not just looking at information in static graphs. You're not at that 30%. If you're using a dashboarding tool, you're able to slice and dice your data. And this is, kind of critical. I know the team at Optimus loves having information you can slice and dice. If you can kind of actually get into the trends and work with that data, so actually, kind of get a bit more of an interaction level with that, you're going to comprehend your business much more effectively. You're going to remember more stuff about your business because you can slice between different sales. You can slice between, sales across different years or different item categories. You're going to have a better understanding of kind of what's going to drive your business. It's going to help you run a better organization. So again, kind of taking that over to how that's going to help your business. First of all, improved insight. Being able to visualize your information is going to give you a bit more effectiveness in spotting patterns. You can think about this, if I look at a grid view of different sales broken down by different item categories, broken down by different months, it's going to be much more effective if I'm looking at that inside of a graph to figure out what months are our most profitable months versus if I look at that in a grid view. This is also going to be able to let me kind of understand what's going to be trends versus what's going to be outliers. If I'm using a data visualization tool and I have a full analytics solution, I can slice and dice data, I can easily isolate what might be an outlier that might make a much larger trend appear. So the ability to slice and dice data is always going to be important. The other way that like a data visualization or a full analytics practice is going to help your business is faster decision making. One of the examples that I like to use here is, if you think about maybe a marketing analyst that's trying to track where your effective spending is going to be. If they do this without a analytics solution, without a data visualization tool, maybe they have to go across 20 different applications to track all their marketing spend. Maybe they have to go look at their Google marketing spend and their Facebook marketing spend and a number of other solutions. So they have to pull all that information in and do spreadsheets. And then if they want to pull that against sales numbers, they have to go into their ERP and pull that information in. And they have to be able to go in and map it together. So then they have all that information mapped together and they can start looking at, okay, well, where is our most effective marketing spend? And then once that's actually all put together, they're probably going to then want to display it in a graph. If you have one location where all those data sources are pulled in and you can easily slice and dice that, that is going to help that user make those decisions and get those business insights much faster. If I can just go in and immediately say, hey, let's see the marketing spend from 5 or 6 different systems, be that maybe the Google spend that we're doing, the Facebook spend, the LinkedIn spend. I can see all of that in a single spot, and I can decide, okay, these are the most effective ways to spend my money. And I can see if there's other trends, maybe if there are particular months where that might be more effective. The more information I can see in one location, the quicker I can get to a decision, and the better I can ask better questions about how I'm running my business. And we're clicking through here. The one last thing I want to kind of cover on this before we get into visualizing data is going to be that I think there's a lot of basis in the business world that data visualization is going to be important. Those of you probably saw the Tableau got acquired by Salesforce for $15.7 billion. Data visualization is going to be a big focus for businesses moving forward. You'll see the same sort of investment in tools like Power BI. The large businesses know that being able to visualize your data in a dashboard format is going to be critical. So that's really why they're kind of investing all that effort behind it. So we've covered that that's important, but now let's actually go through the process here. So I like looking at this example here. This is actually from this textbook, Visualizing Data. It's a fairly complex technical textbook written by Ben Fry, who studied at MIT. And these are the 7 stages of visualizing data. So you're looking at acquiring, so obtaining the data, whether that's from a file or through a disk or a different source over a network. You're kind of going in and grabbing that data, parsing it out. So you want to give some structure to that data's meaning, and then order it in relevant categories. Filter, so you want to just basically only have what information is going to be relevant. Mine, you want to maybe apply some methods of statistics or data mining to look at patterns and look for some mathematical context behind the data. Then you want to represent that, so you want to try with your initial graph to kind of show what that's going to look like. And then refine, you want to make sure that that graph that you have is going to be the most effective way to display that data. You might want to try a couple different graphs. Maybe, for example, maybe a bar chart's not going to work. You'll want to go to like a line chart or a pie chart, depending on what the data is. And then last but not least is going to be interact. So you want to be able to slice and dice that data. So kind of getting back to the fact that you're going to better comprehend your information if you're able to really get in there and have interaction with this. Now, the nice part is that if you're a Dynamics user and you're using an analytics tool, a lot of these steps are already done. You can see that in this next slide here. You can see I've kind of already said acquire and parse are already done. If I'm using Dynamics GP or Dynamics Nav, we already have that data sitting somewhere. It's sitting in a financial or an ERP system. So we already have most of that financial data. That data already has some meaning. So we've already put that together. All those mathematical trends behind that, well, we just know it's a financial system. So we don't need to do steps 1, 2, and 4 here. And you'll see if you have a full analytics tool, the end user can really do steps 5, 6, and 7 on their own. So you don't need a technical user to be able to go in and do this. You'll see in some of the examples that we have, it's going to be easy for the casual business user to actually set up a graph, refine a graph, and kind of get the look and feel that they want to refine a full dashboard, and then interact with it on their own. They don't need to have kind of a technical awareness. But what's still going to be critical is that filter piece. And what we kind of focus on is data management. There's a lot of reasons that you're really going to want to make sure that you are pulling the right data in to a dashboard and you're connecting it correctly so that you actually have meaningful information. Takes us to our next slide. Why is data management important? Well, first of all, moving forward, you're going to have a lot of additional data. In the future, the more information you have, the more successful you're going to be. So collecting data about your business is always going to get easier. There are more and more applications out there that are going to allow you to learn more and more about your business. And I was going to say it's not only easy to do that, but in a lot of cases, it's going to become mandatory. If you're not collecting data about your business, be that your customers or your vendors or whoever it's going to be, then your competitors probably are. And from that additional information, they're going to be a bit more competitive. So really having all that additional information is going to be, like I said, easy and mandatory. And then your business is going to change over time. No business is going to do the same thing, basically in the next 5 years they did in the last 5 years. So you're probably going to change how you do business. You want to make sure that you have a data management process that can reflect those changes. It'd be something like maybe you start paying commission a little bit differently, or maybe you start tracking different information. You need to have a tool that is going to map those changes so you can see, Maybe we were collecting different sets of information 5 years ago versus now, but how do those numbers relate? Is there actually a tool that is tying that information together? And that data is also going to come from different sources. So obviously most of the folks on the call are probably Dynamics users, so they'll probably have like a SQL connection to Dynamics GP or Dynamics Nav. But there are a number of other data sources that some of those other applications might come from. I called out a few specifically, stuff like APIs into other systems or web services. You can have more complex technical examples like non-SQL examples, but none of these are all going to come from the exact same system. You likely were trying to tie in, again, other information from different APIs or different web services and make a sense of how you're going to tie that all together. The other thing is that, this data is all going to be imperfect. So there's always going to be errors with data. I've got a good list here of kind of some examples of imperfect data. And this is from a guy, Randy Awu, who writes a blog called Towards Data Science and works over at Google. Some of the examples of imperfect data that he's run into in the 5+ years that he's been in the space are things like internal users using their data source for testing, or employees or friends of the business use. Those can kind of make data not appear correct. You might have stuff like strategic partners, where you've got one partner that's really doing a large amount of sales and maybe they're billed at a discount. How are you actually managing that if you're pulling that into a dashboard so that it doesn't provide a much different context than how the information is actually set up? Maybe you have a reseller account that effectively controls 50 accounts worth of activity in one account. How do you split that up? Do you have a process to do that? And even stuff like calendars, it can be very difficult. And so really you want to make sure that your data is effectively managed and put together. Unmanaged data is going to be worse than no data, because that means that you're trying to start making assumptions off of data that is not correctly joined, and all of a sudden you're making assumptions off bad information, and that is worse than no data, so you're making no assumptions, or you're just making assumptions or making decisions rather off of kind of just your day-to-day interaction with stuff. So this data management piece is really going to be important. That's why JET is going to use an ETL process. So ETL process, is going to be extract. I want to be able to pull information from a single data source or data sources. I want to transform, so I want to pull in only what's relevant and create relationships between data. And then I want to load it into a format that I can easily consume that. For JET, that's going to be the data warehouse in cubes, and we'll walk through kind of what that process looks like. Matthew's actually going to show an example of like our ETL tool and how this can easily be done so you can tie everything together. So looking at this another way, this is kind of our full ETL process, and you can see here if we start over on the left, these are going to be kind of our starting databases. And you can think about if I'm just starting with Dynamics, this is a relational database. So it's all tables and fields. All these data sources are really designed to store information. Think about Nav and GP. They're designed to store as much information as possible. They're not necessarily designed to pull that information out. So as the end user, if I'm reporting directly against this, or I'm trying to build a dashboard directly against this, I have to know how all my tables and fields are structured to be able to go in and tie that information together. And just like I mentioned earlier, this doesn't just have to be one database. This could be multiple databases. In the future, this likely will be multiple databases for you. Everything's in a bit more of a complex format because all these applications are just trying to store that data. Pulling it back out for reports and dashboards, again, is going to be a little bit more difficult. But that's the nice part about the ETL process. And then as that gets pushed into the data warehouse and cubes, it's much more effective to actually pull that out for reports and dashboards. So if I look at the data warehouse example here, you can see that now I've got this all grouped by different types. I can have this set up by maybe different vendors or different customers. I've pulled in a number of different tables and I've tied them together. I know what the relationship is between them, so I don't need to go in and map everything together. It's all just tied together in one spot. And again, I can have that data from those multiple data sources. So it doesn't just have to be kind of SQL through for Dynamics. You can have other data sources pulled in here. You can have that relationship between those data sources already set up, and then you can pull it in and effectively kind of go in and consume it. And then if we take it a step further, we'll get into the cubes. And cubes are something that Jet really specializes in because we specialize in the dynamic space. And OLAP cubes will factor in what we'll call dimensionality, which you'll see here in a minute. What this is going to allow you to do is do very complex breakdowns. In a report that might be something like, let's say maybe sales broken down by item category, broken down by year, with the ability to slice and dice between different salespeople and maybe different locations. You can do that instantly. You can do it without knowing the structure of your data source. You just need to know what you want to pull out of the system. This will also make building out more complex dashboards very easy because same concept. I can just go in and click exactly what I need. I don't need to build out a complex query to get everything pulled together. I can just say, hey, I want to see maybe sales by location, sales by item category, sales by whatever it's going to be. I can tie that together. I can put that into a dashboarding tool, and I can easily have that. The other thing that's really going to be critical for a dashboarding or a data visualization practice is going to be those calculations. You can have stuff like KPIs, so key performance indicators, and those will be set as single calculations in the back end. If you do a KPI without this, that means that the calculation's inside of the actual system. And so if you have multiple people trying to build out multiple dashboards, it's possible that maybe they get the calculation different within the actual dashboard. If you're using cubes, you have that calculation in one central location. So everybody's using that same number. So that way, if Steve builds one dashboard and then Frank builds another dashboard, that calculation is going to be the same across both because you're using one central source of data. And you also see this is going to be much faster. So because this is all pre-calculated, you can instantly interact with it, which again is going to be kind of critical for what people are expecting when they want to have successful dashboards. They want to be able to instantly slice and dice it. They don't want to have to say, hey, I want to break this down and see this a different way, and then I have to wait for 5 minutes for it to refresh. No, they want to be able to instantly slice and dice. So the cubes are really going to allow you to do that very quickly in a very controlled manner in a way that's going to be very easy for end users to actually go in and start building out dashboards and reports. And we can see this deployment from another example here. You can see maybe I'm pulling in multiple data sources. So I've got maybe an old legacy database, I've got a CRM database, I've got my Dynamics database, and I'm pulling that through an ETL tool. And we talked about the ETL process, but really one of the things that will help you deploy a data visualization or an analytics practice very quickly is having an ETL tool. Jet has one, it's called the Jet Data Manager. Matthew on the call today will go in and do an overview of that. But what that's going to allow you to do is connect all those tables and fields very quickly because you're doing it in a point-and-click interface. So you can go in and instead of having to manually write out all the SQL code that would be required to typically deploy a data warehouse or cubes, this can be done in a point-and-click interface. That means that this can be done 5 to 7 times faster, which is going to be important because that means it's going to be much more cost-effective to go in and deploy. And then it's also going to be a lot easier to make those changes. Think back to that example I talked about data governance. Your business is going to change, so you need to be able to make those changes fairly quickly and effectively inside of the data warehouse to reflect any business changes you do. So with a ETL tool, you're very quickly and easily able to make those changes. And then once those are pushed out, you can push those out in a couple different ways. Let's see, I can push this out into like Power BI. So we'll show some actual dashboard examples, but this can also be done inside of Excel using Jet or even in Excel online. So what we're talking about today for the full analytics tool, or for kind of a full data visualization practice, is using our full analytics tool. And there's a couple key things behind our analytics tool. I already talked about the ETL tool or the data warehouse automation tool being a key thing the fact that I can easily go in and make changes to my data very quickly and effectively. The other thing that really allows us to be successful in this space is that we've got pre-built projects for Dynamics Nav and Dynamics GP. So we've got a pre-built data warehouse. We've got 6 pre-built cubes that ship out of the box that allow you to build out those dashboards and those reports very quickly. Every example that I'm actually going to do right here is going to be all using our pre-built project. So there's no customizations, there's no third-party add-ons, but when you have those, if you start with Jet Analytics, you'll start with the pre-built project that'll install in 2.5 to 3 hours, and then you can work in any customizations using the data warehouse automation tool or the Jet Data Manager to quickly build out a customization so that you can have cubes that are exactly for your needs. And you can even have custom cubes if there's something specific that you want to look at. So that being said, like I said, everybody kind of understands why data visualization is important and what that data governance piece is really going to bring to the table. But I want to actually start out with a couple examples from scratch here. The first example I just want to show is kind of how effectively you can pull information out of a system using the cubes here. This will give some good context to how everything's already pre-connected, and then you'll see how easy that'll make building out dashboards. So again, if we go into our Jet ribbon here, looking at that, and I have the option, of course, to look directly at my data source, but for these examples, we want to be looking at the cubes. I'm going to go into our pivot table functionality, which is what I can use to actually build out dashboards. And I can go in and I can select which one of our pre-built cubes I want to use. So I can go in here. And the nice part about the cubes is that when I open them up, they're just measures and dimensions. So measures are all numerical values. This will be stuff like, cost, profit percentage, sales amount. And then dimensions are going to be anything that gives those meanings. So that could be stuff like item category, location, posting date, etc. Now, if I want to build out a complex report, I can do that fairly quickly. So let's say I want to go sales amount, and I want to look at cost amount, and I want to look at profit and profit percentage. I can grab that instantly. And let's say I want to give that a bit more meaning. Go in. I could go in and do item category. I could go in and I can do posting date. And I can pull all of that together. And then I can actually get into the details on that. I could go in, look at subcategories. I can look at specific categories. I can double click. And I can open this up and I'll get all the transactional detail behind it. And again, the nice part about this is that it'll open up here. This will have transactional detail across multiple systems. It's just like I said earlier, you likely will have multiple systems that you want to report against or you want to build dashboards against. With Jet, you can tie all that information together and pull that into one location. You can see here, I can go through, tie this out. If I want to include some slicers here, I can do that as well. And actually, let's grab actual salesperson name. That's going to look a little bit nicer. And let's maybe break this one down by item category. And let's do maybe one more by location. And I think that'll do it, but then maybe we want to actually get a visual here. We talked about data visualization. Let's actually show that in action. We can see we can actually get a graph here. And now I can slice and dice this data, and I can do that instantly. And I can go in, I can move stuff around depending on what I want to look at. This is all just very easy for the end user to do. Again, just because that data model's already been tied together. Again, very easy reporting because of the analytics tool, but let's see how you can use this same functionality to actually build out a dashboard. So I'll open up another example here. This is actually one of the pre-built sales dashboards that we have. And you'll see how easy it was for us to actually build this. We can go in here, and if I just wanted to see sales by item category, there are basically 4 boxes that were selected. We went through, we grabbed sales amount, we grabbed profit, and we grabbed item category. We put that all together. There was a little bit of Excel formatting that went in to get this look and feel here, depending on what we're looking for. And then we went in and put the graph in, and then we dropped it into one location inside of Excel. And then we added all these slicers. So now we can slice and dice this data. So you can see, obviously we've got kind of all the graphs that we're going to use. We've got the detail behind them. But if I actually want to use this as a dashboard, I can do it fairly easily. You can go in and say, hey, I just want to look at my North America sales. And I just want to isolate to maybe these 4 salespeople. And maybe I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, all right, well, Annette's doing pretty well from a sales perspective, but seems like she's been selling a lot of bags and totes. Look at that really quickly. Wow. Okay. Clearly there is a very large trend here. So it looks like Annette is the only person that is selling bags and totes. Go in. And again, we're able to see all of this because all this information's been mapped together with the data warehouse and cubes, and we're easily able to get kind of the slicing and dicing of this data because that model is already put together. You can see that same context, if we're looking at like other examples of business information, you can see that I can do the same thing with like accounts payable, where I can have everything broken down and easily accessible. I can jump in and see those details. And again, building out these reports is very easy because of the back-end chat functionality. So some examples of some dashboards inside of Excel or some reports inside of Excel. But I want to go in and actually show some examples inside of Power BI. Power BI is a great tool, but the important thing to remember about it is that really the focus behind this tool is that front end. So like I mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot more focus on making the data look good. If I just open it up and I want to go in and I want to start building out a dashboard, I have to actually know where all my data lives. So if I want to go in and maybe I want to build this directly against my Dynamics database, and I have to go in and open it up. I can go in here, and as soon as I open this up, I see all those tables and fields inside of my Dynamics database. So if I want to report against this, I have to tie all of these together in order to get the beginning of my dashboard. So fairly difficult. The average end business user is not going to know how to do this. But the nice part about Jet is that if I want to build out a dashboard in Power BI using the Jet cubes, I can do it very easily. I can connect directly into those cubes. And we'll use some example. These are nav OLAP cubes, but these are example of both some nav and some GP data that's all tied together. And I can open this up. And then if I want to build out a dashboard, I can do that very easily and effectively. I can go in and I can go sales amount. And I can go in and go item category. And then same thing, if I want to go sales amount and I want to look at maybe, let's do sales amount and let's do salesperson. Same thing. I can go in, I can tie this dashboard together very quickly and effectively. And maybe I don't want to do a bar chart for this one, so maybe I want to do a pie chart. can look at that as well. Maybe that one doesn't look good. Let's do a donut. That looks a little bit better. And then same thing, maybe I want to look at, let's say maybe my sales amount. Let's do a line chart. Maybe we want to see this by posting date. See, I can look at that. And luckily this is sample data, so we're not actually doing that poorly, but you can see again, we've got some good context on how this is all set up. And then so we actually want to factor in some of those KPIs. So we can go in and tie those in very quickly and effectively. And I can just go in and select those. And the actual calculation isn't done inside of this dashboard. The actual calculation is done, again, in the back end of Jet. So if somebody else builds another dashboard using these cubes, they're going to get the same KPIs if they slice and dice data because you're using the same calculation across both. I can do, maybe let's do one more. Let's do maybe a sales amount. And we'll drag that one in there. We've got the beginnings of a dashboard. But then let's say we want to actually do a bit more of a complex data visualization, which is really what Power BI is optimized for. Same thing, I can do that very effectively. Maybe I actually want to see where our most profitable customer is going to be located. And I can tie that information together instantly. So I can say, all right, we're looking at cities, but I want to actually see that overlaid in a map. I could go in here and I can actually build out that example where we're looking at our most profitable customers depending on what city they're located in. I think I can even go in a little bit more complex here and actually throw in item category. Not quite as nice. You can see I can actually go in and factor more information here. And then the nice part about Power BI is that I can do most of the slicing and dicing inside of the dashboard. So if I want to look at like a specific breakdown of different item categories, I can actually slice and dice that using this functionality. So depending on what I want to look at, I can see all those details. I can give us a bit more room on this. You can see again, I can slice and dice stuff. Another nice thing about Power BI is that I can actually do drill down here inside of the tool. So if I want to look at caps and hats, I can actually open this up into those subcategories of caps and hats. I can even go into specific item categories. And I can play around on how that's going to affect the other graphs. So depending on the relationship that I want, and these other graphs will either change or not change depending on if I do that drill down. But this really lets me get my hands on the data, which as we kind of saw earlier, that's really going to help you understand your business better, is when you can actually go in and slice and dice this data and get this context. You're going to get a better understanding of your business, and ultimately, you're going to be able to run a more effective organization. So, again, this was kind of one example of a dashboard. What I think I'd like to do now is hand this over to Matthew and have him walk through the key part of building this, which is our backend, so the Jet Data Manager. And he can walk through kind of what that process actually looks like, as well as what the process is to set up a KPI. And then the last example we'll show is, what happens if you don't have a data governance strategy in place? How can you all of a sudden start making incorrect assumptions? So Matthew, are you still there?
I am here. Absolutely.
Are you able to share?
Let's see. I think so.
And there we go.
How does that look?
That looks great.
Okay, great.
And Matthew, before you get in this, I do want to kind of clarify for folks, what we're opening up now is the Jet Data Manager. This is typically going to be for a more technical user. So if you're looking at this and thinking, hey, those dashboards looked really easy, but you opened up the Jet Data Manager and it looked fairly difficult, keep in mind, this is really not something that the end user is actually going to be going in and making changes. Your team can possibly do it if you have the right resources, but you have a great partner with Optimus, and they can help you do a lot of changes here. The kind of value of what Matthew is going to be showing is that those changes can be deployed very quickly and effectively. You can make those simple changes to stuff like KPIs. But yeah, don't get overwhelmed if it looks a little technical.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Good advice. Good advice. Thanks, John. So like John was saying, what we're looking at here is the Jet Data Manager, or sometimes I'll refer to it as the JDM. And this is our ETL automation tool. And just a little refresher from the presentation, ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. All right. So what we're doing is we're extracting data from one or more data sources. We're transforming it inside of a staging area, and then we're loading it into a set of data warehouse tables and a set of analysis services cubes for input to the data visualization types of front ends that John was just showing you. Okay? So first thing I like to point out is what we're looking at here is our out-of-the-box nav project. And what I've done is I've actually integrated a legacy GP database with it just as an example, and I'll go over that as an example of what we can do with this tool. But the main thing to take away from this is that most of the heavy lifting in this BI project is already done for you. We've already compiled a base nav project. We've compiled a base Dynamics GP project, and also a Dynamics AX project, all right? And kind of different flavors of each of them, but they're downloadable from our website, so from our Cube store. So if you own Jet Analytics, you're gonna own those projects automatically. So I would say 85 or 90% of the data mapping of a base, nav project is already done here, and that's huge because especially some of these more complex data structures in these more complex ERP systems, that can take a long time just to get your base mappings done. So all of that is done for you already. So what I'll do here is I'm going to double click where it says business unit here. And that's just when I double click on the left here, it's going to open up different tabs here for different parts of this project. So what I want to show you here is the data sources area. Okay, I'm going to highlight on my nav adapter. We have different adapters that we've written, nav and GP being two of them. The adapters are just a little bit smarter about the data source. They know things about the nav database. For instance, how nav companies are stored and interacted with and things like that. Adapters just make it easier to develop in the BI world like this. For instance, if we have 10 companies inside of our nav database, we don't have to repeat all of that mapping 10 times. The adapter handles all that for us. Okay? So on the left-hand side here, we're going to see every single table inside of that nav database that we're using in the project. Okay? I'm just going to highlight customer here, and I'm going to click on the plus. And as you can see, we've got a subset of all of the fields in the customer table. Okay? So subset meaning to make this more efficient, we're not going to just pull every data point in. We're only going to pull in what we want to use. All right. So shift over here on the right-hand side, and I'm going to expand this customer with the checkbox next to it. And what you're going to see is every single data point in the customer table. All right. The ones that have check marks are the ones we've already selected. All right. But this is an important feature here. Every single data point, every custom and base table and field inside of your nav database is exposed here. All right. So among other things, it's very easy to add things to your project. Like, let's just say, for instance, I had an end user come to me and say, I want currency code on my customer card. I just selected that. It popped it over here under source, and that's all it took. It's included inside of our project, okay? So before I go into the GP stuff, let me just hop up here to my staging area. And again, the staging area is where we do that transform, the ETL. The T in the ETL is transform. So, and honestly, this is where most of the heavy lifting happens. Because if you think about it, any kind of BI process, it's going to be heavily weighted on transforming that data and getting it into a format that we want. Because to our end users, we don't want them to have to do any of that. We want to present one layer to our end users that's very easy and very efficient for them to use. Okay? This customer table turned red. That's just because I made a change to it. Here's that currency code I pulled in. We have a couple of other types of fields here. The ones in red are called lookups or conditional lookups. That's another feature of the transform area. I'm just expanding this salesperson name as an example. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll pull in ancillary information from other tables and include it in the main table. And again, this is kind of counteractive to what Nav does. Nav is more efficient for transaction entry. So it's going to store all this data the way it's supposed to. But what we've done is we're exposing the salesperson name right on that customer card. So my end user can use either the name or the code. Doesn't matter, okay? There's these tables up here in lavender. Those are custom tables. We can create custom tables, custom fields, any kind of custom operations around any of those. That's all available here. So our final step, I'm going to double click here on our data warehouse itself. This is our data warehouse, and as you can tell, the tables are renamed to be proper case and more user-friendly because this is the actual layer that our end users are going to see. So I'm going to grab this currency code, pull that over. Now it's included. In there, I just dragged it up to be with the other C's there, okay? But once I deploy that change out, that's going to be available to our end users. So that's kind of a simple example of how we're adding a data point into our system. We can do a lot of other much more complex things, okay? So for example, I'm going to go back over here to my data source. I'm going to close my data warehouse. And what I've done here is I've also connected to a GP database. So let's say the scenario is I've got a GP system that I'm upgrading to Nav, but I want to keep that GP data, the legacy data, I want to keep that around for historical purposes. Okay, so I can just as easily connect to it. And in this example, it's I'm just grabbing a couple of these tables, the 20,000. So that's our financial transactions, part of our financial transactions. I'm going to include that in with our Nav data. Okay, very easy to include it right in the same interface. You build it in with your regular tables here. So if I go down to my customer ledger entry, probably, this is probably where I would kind of integrate all of that information in, okay? But I'll open up my data warehouse again. Really, the main thing is in this finance transactions area. So as you can see here, I've included that GP table as well as the NAV table. So my financial transactions table is going to contain records from both systems. Okay? And if anybody's interested in the actual process of that, I'm kind of glossing over it, but I'd be happy to go into more depth on a separate call or something like that. Anyway, the final step in this, I'm going to double click here on my OLAP. OLAP is another way of saying cube, like John was talking about. Cubes are made up of dimensions and measures. The dimensions are the ways we're looking at data. The measures are the actual numbers. And here's my base cubes here. I'm going to double click on the sales cube. That's what John was working with. And just to show you, here's where all of those measures are defined. And on the bottom here, we're consuming those dimensions that are listed on the bottom there. But again, very easy to work with. Let's go over here to customer. If I say add quick level here, it's very easy for me to grab that currency code. Now all of a sudden, when I deploy this changeout, any of these cubes that use that customer dimension to slice and dice, they'll also be able to see a currency code on there and slice and dice that. I've got several different kinds of measures here. What I can do very easily here is define additional measures, and this can be as simple as just pulling a field over, or it can be as complex as creating what's called a time-sensitive measure. So a lot of these numbers, like year-to-date calculations, quarter-to-date, month-to-date, averages, all of those calculations, those are all pre-calculated in those cubes. If you remember, when John was going over the front end, all of those fields were available. All he had to do was click on them, and those numbers instantaneously showed up, either in that Power BI example or in the Jet Reports interface in Excel. They come in instantly because that's what a cube does. It pre-calculates all of those numbers and makes all of those numbers available to end users in a very efficient, very quick way. Okay, so I'll just say profit here. Let's say that I want from my posted transactions table. Very easy to do this. I'm just going to say my sales minus my cost. That's all it took to do a profit calculation. Okay, so very easy interface here.
And to clarify here, Matthew, obviously profits, one of the out-of-the-box measures. It's a pre-calculated value, but I mean, you can do much more complex calculations.
Yes, very much so. Yep.
And specifically, if you're, maybe getting into, more complex dashboarding examples, maybe you're looking at, if you're a retail location, I think we've seen like, sales by your square footage. Those calculations can easily be worked in here. And again, like I'm going to keep kind of pushing on this point because it's critical, is the fact that this is done inside of the cubes means you have one central location that everybody's getting the same set of information from, which is always critical. Obviously, you can do that same calculation inside of Excel or inside of the dashboard, but if you have two people doing it in two different dashboards, what if they do a slightly different calculation? You will spend, hours trying to figure out who actually has the right calculation, where if you have an ETL tool, you can set that calculation once and you don't need to worry about who has the right calculation. Everybody has that, even if it's something a little bit more complex.
Very good point.
Yeah, and sorry, Matthew, I had to jump in there just because I know we've seen a lot of people run into that challenge. So I'm just going to keep working on it until it doesn't happen anymore.
Right on, sure. So, and that's actually a good segue into what I was going to show next. And by the way, this is all customizable. All of these data points are customizable, very easy to add or change. This also comes with a full suite of security that you can apply on all of these different objects. So I'm not going to go into that, but suffice it to say, you can lock down any of this data. You can even go granular. You can do row-level security on it. So for instance, maybe a certain manager only sees information in their territory or in their different location or something like that. That's all very easy to set up here. But to John's point, I'm going to close those and double click on my data warehouse here again. I just want to show you an example in the posted sales transaction table here. Inside of Dynamics Nav, posted sales transactions actually come from, I believe it's 6 different tables. All right, that information gets merged into one table, but it's comprised out of information from 6 different tables. So this is a good example of the base user is not going to know, typically not going to know what 6 tables that data comes from. Moreover, how they all link together and how to join them all together to get the numbers that they want. Okay, so I'm going to hop over here in just a little example example report that I wrote. Okay, on the top here, what I have is I'm going to pull up the wizard here that shows me where this number is coming from. Okay, on the top we're getting information from that sales posted transactions table. Okay, so that's coming from my data warehouse. All right, but on the bottom, I'm going directly against my nav database. Okay, and I'm going against the sales invoice header table. Okay, so in this scenario, I had a user that said, okay, I'm pretty sure that I want sales information, and I'm pretty sure this is the table it comes from. Okay, but because of the fact that there are actually 5 or 6 different tables that information comes from, I'm going to run this report and I'll show you the difference here. Okay, so we've got the same set of customers, okay, supposedly the same number, but drastically different results here. Okay, so that's just an example of data governance that John was talking about. If you don't intimately know what your data looks like on the back end there, then it's very, very difficult for you to get the information out of that system that you need. And that's where the JDM, that's where analytics comes in, is it allows you to pre-define all of that, take that burden off your users, and just give them a really easy interface with all the information kind of at their fingertips and ready to go. Okay.
Yep.
So, John, I don't know if there's anything in particular you wanted me to show on the back end.
I mean, I kind of wanted to just add in, obviously, it seems like it's a fairly simple example, and I think Matthew actually put it together pretty quickly, but, this is something that we see all the time, that people are going in, they're trying to do kind of reporting directly against the data source, and they start making all these assumptions off of kind of incorrect data. And this is just off of base nav, correct, Matthew? There's no customizations or no third-party add-ons. Yeah. So, I mean, this will get more complicated when you have customizations. If you have custom tables or fields, which I will be willing to bet pretty much any user here that's using Dynamics does not just have a standard out-of-the-box solution. They have customizations. They have third-party add-ons that they've gone in to make their system work better for them. That becomes more and more complicated because you're just looking at more tables. Those mistakes are more likely to happen. But if you're using like a full ETL tool, then you can easily go in and connect this in a much more meaningful format. And you don't have to worry that you're all of a sudden going to be making decisions off of bad data. Because just like I said, decisions off bad data is worse than just no decisions at all or decisions off of no data at all, because at least no data at all, at least you're not making assumptions based off just horrible information. Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of all I had. I might want to close real quickly here on just a quick example that I actually started with, which was that retail dashboard that I had put together for the Optimus team. I was going to pull that up, just kind of show that as an example, because there's some good KPIs that are custom built into that. So we can show that, and then I'm going to actually save a little bit of time for questions if I can figure out how to change this back over for sharing. Matthew, I'm going to steal the sharing option from you.
Go for it. Okay. Yep. We're back to you.
Yep. And so last thing, again, I mean, this is a dashboard that was actually built out for the Optimus team. Hector requested this, and this has got a number of custom KPIs. So you're looking at sell-through, sales per employee, sales per square foot, average transaction value, all of that good stuff. And you'll see as I click through this will actually kind of change depending on what the KPIs are that I'm looking at. So you can have stuff that's a lot more complex depending on what you're looking at. And again, you can have a lot more control of this with Jet. So I want to kind of pause here and kind of give folks a chance to ask any questions. I know we've got about I think 22 minutes left. We'll probably end this a little early, but I do want to maybe take 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type those in. Or I think you can raise your hand on the participants portion and I can have you talk. So go ahead. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll give folks another minute or two. I know typically we always have a few questions on those, so we'll let folks go in and jump in on those. And it looks like I've got somebody kind of asking around the cost of the solution. For that, I definitely would recommend reaching out to the team over at Optimus. Again, they're one of the best partners out there. They can give you some good context and additional information on anything that needs to be done. And I think I see a question around what data sources we can connect to. Very good question. I realized I kind of missed that when we were doing the initial intro. We can connect to anything that's SQL, OLE, or ODBC. We also partner with a company called CData that offers, I think probably at this point about 100 kind of pre-built connections into a number of different data sources. So you can build dashboards regardless of what information you want to pull in. Jet's really going to be an effective way to go in and do that. And any other questions here? I'm not seeing any other ones.
I think just one thing I would add to that, John, is just the fact that we are also totally compatible with D365. That whole world has opened up. So we're using drivers that can both connect directly to it and also interact with our analytics products.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Matthew, for pointing that out. And yeah, that's always a good thing to notice that if you're on Dynamics 365, Business Central, or even Finance and Operations, Jet can also connect to all of those solutions. We've also got pre-built projects for both of those as well. I think I was under the assumption we'd mostly have some nav GP folks, but I realized, yep, there's probably going to be some folks that are looking at Business Central. Again, if you're curious about any of those options, reach out to Optimus. Like I said, great partner that is always a good advocate for kind of the best for their clients. So I always recommend them to go in and provide some details.
Well, and I know that what I'm running into a lot on the technical side is a lot of cloud-based systems, whether that be an ERP or something different. And because if it's based in the cloud, you typically don't have a direct connection to that database. So you use things like web services and different types of drivers. So those are all things that we can also connect to in the cloud world.
Yep. Yeah, very, very good point. Thank you, Matthew. All right. Well, I think that's about it. I don't see any other questions. Like I would say, if you have any questions, of course, you're always free to reach out to me if you do have any questions, johnp@jetglobal.com. But I would always recommend reaching out to the team at Optimus. They have a good team. I know Vishal kicked us off here, so he's always a good point of contact to kind of get folks to the right resources where they need to be. Same thing, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll let you know who kind of the best resource is. Thank you again, Matthew, for jumping in. I know I kind of grabbed you and wanted a bit more of a technical breakdown for this presentation. So
sure, my pleasure.
Appreciate the time.
Happy to do it.
And other than that, I'm going to give everybody back a few minutes into their day. Everybody have